Summerall.
Summerall's going to Auburn.
Yeah, that one kind of expected.
So if Summerall goes to Auburn, we don't know who's going there.
We already breaking some news here. You're listening to the live stream just starting here. Jim, what breaking news do you have for college football?
Well, I've spoken to serious sources at the University of Florida who told me that they're guardedly optimistic that they will land Lane Kiffin as their next head football coach. Now, there isn't a timeline on it, and there isn't obviously a signed contract yet. So my guess is that what's going on in Oxford is that they're looking to figure out a way to extend Kiffin so that he's not, that moving to the Florida is not so enticing that he just doesn't stay where he is. So that's that. And then on the other side, we've got Tulane's John Summerall as the leading candidate to land in Auburn at this point in time. So those are two coach things. And then, of course, Matt, you were talking about James Franklin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I struggle with that Pete Thamel report. I don't have any insider information in terms of it, but given who James Franklin's agent is and Jimmy Sexton, right. When that report that Thamel talks about, he said there's mutual interest between them. Well, I've seen them linked together for probably really since that job opened. A couple of weeks ago, they started having more pointed, like, hey, there's legitimate interest here. And so with Thamel putting that report out, it almost feels more like a leverage play from Jimmy Sexton and James Franklin in terms of like, hey, he might be making this decision soon. So if you want him, that job better open up if there's some places maybe down south that he's got his eye on.
Well, I can tell you too, in my conversations with the person at Florida, that James Franklin has been in touch and they have had some preliminary, and I can't stress this word any stronger, preliminary conversations with James at Florida. I don't think, and this is just speculation on my part, 100% speculation, not anything, rooted in anything I know. I don't see Franklin leaving Penn State and end up at Virginia Tech.
Yeah, it would be an interesting jump for him.
I have some more breaking news right now. The ACC stinks. That's my breaking news. Louisville lost last night as a ranked team to Clemson at home. This league stinks, man. There's no chance. Maybe Georgia Tech could win a playoff game, I guess. I don't know, maybe one, but, I just don't have any confidence that they'll win a game. There's two ranked teams played last night. Obviously, Oregon was the other one on Friday night with a big 42-13 over Minnesota. Just real quickly, too, this is the other kind of football, but our friend of Sports Talk, Chris Wheatley, who's was nice enough to hook me up with the people to get me the Chelsea and Nottingham Forest credentials, and is a massive, with he's got 400,000 followers on X, and he's big time guy. But sent me a story this morning that I posted on Sports Talk Florida that our another friend of the show, Marinakis, Mr. Marinakis, who owns shipping companies across the world and Nottingham Forest and Olympiacos and stuff. One of his players, Christos Moutsakis, has won the Golden Boy. So I know he's watching. Chris is watching out wherever he is. He's been in China. He's been in wherever. He's a big fan of sports. So I know he's watching, and hopefully going to be on streaming soon with us. But he sent us that story, so we got that before a lot of people did, which is good. So the other kind of football, Jim,
right?
Other kind of football.
One of the three that we cover. We cover
football
in the United States.
We call it football. Yeah, we call it
football. And then Australian rules.
Australian rules football. We call it football. They'll show the site will be launching soon. It'll have college football, NFL, rugby, soccer, football, and Australian rules. So that'll be launching. But early, so I'm looking at the schedule today, and you got there's a early game where it's two ranked teams playing, but you got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of two played last night, obviously. So 7 of the 23 ranked teams are playing in the very first window early. Wisconsin at Indiana, South Carolina at Texas A&M, Notre Dame at Pittsburgh, Michigan at Northwestern, South Florida, our South Florida team at Navy, and Arizona at Cincinnati. Of those, I know Jim, you'll probably take the South Florida game because that South Florida at Navy is a big game for the league. But Matt, I guess you'd be looking at the South Carolina Texas A&M or Notre Dame was Pittsburgh, right?
Yeah, I would go more Notre Dame Pittsburgh. That South Carolina Texas A&M game doesn't exactly move the needle for me. Texas A&M's handled their business, all things considered. They've been really good at maintaining their focus and just moving on to the next week. Maintaining that week by week approach. They've just been a better football team all year than everybody else they've played. That's going to be no different here in a couple hours. So they should handle their business against the South Carolina team that, quite frankly, just never got it going this year. It had some talent, the talent you felt capable. Shane Beamer's kind of pieced that thing together here the last couple of years. Just hadn't come together for him. And Texas A&M's defense is fantastic. They're going to give Lenore Sowers a really tough day today.
Hey, Jim. I guess we're watching South Florida Navy for Sports Talk Florida, right? Another big game for them.
It's a really interesting one too, Sean. Michael Kelly, who basically hired Alex Golish and honestly turned around USF's program. He's got he was a catalyst and a very important person to be involved with the on-campus stadium, which is now in full swing. They've broken ground, and there's stuff you can go down there and you can start to see the bones of the stadium being built for the on-campus side. He also hired a new basketball coach after Amir Rashid unfortunately passed away. And they literally in the preseason are co-favorites to win the American with Memphis. Getting back to what you're talking about, the Navy game. Kelly is now the athletic director at Navy because he's a DC guy, and they let him out of the contract, so he's there. And so it's the South Florida game where Navy, the AD at Navy was a year ago the AD at South Florida. But honestly, guys, somebody who is not in the Heisman mix is Byron Brown, who's a quarterback at USF, and Byron is a freak. Okay, he is a tremendous runner. He's got a good ability to pass. If I had to equate him to somebody in the pros, you might know, he's not quite Patrick Mahomes from a standpoint of, because he throws the ball from different arm angles and can run. He's not Lamar Jackson. He's somewhere in between those two, which is not a bad company. But here's the thing: Navy has been very good this year at scoring, but they've also been very bad at keeping the other teams from scoring. So they win a lot of games, but they also give up a lot of points. Athletically, I think South Florida has the definite advantage today, and so I think that South Florida will win the game. I don't know what this point spread is, but it should be, I would say, 10.5. 10.5. I think 10.5 is fair. I do. Navy plays that old style wishbone offense, which has been pretty good for them. They also have a quarterback who can throw. The biggest problem with Navy is that the athletes have to be a specific size, and that because of obviously the the way that the Naval Academy to get in, you have to meet both physical as well as
Can't be flying
the
planes
mental.
at 6'8", 350 pounds.
Right, exactly.
Or on a nuclear submarine. Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah, it would be difficult because the bunks are not that big. So anyway, I think that Navy could be giving South Florida, because South Florida has a tendency to start slow. They could very well be, that game could be close in the first half, but I think once, and also it's there's a chance of rain here, although at the moment it looks like it's going to be fine. So everything's pointing to South Florida's win the South afternoon, and if they take care of business, which they know, they win 4 games. That's it. The number is 4. They win 4 games, they're in the playoffs.
You guys you talked about the Heisman odds, and just before we moved to the 3:30 games, right now it looks like a 2-horse race specific to the odds. Fernando Mendoza and Julian Sayin are basically neck and neck. They're about anywhere between plus 130 and plus 170, both of them. And then Marcel Reed is down the list at plus 700. Ty Simpson's down a little bit. It looks like a 2-horse race between Mendoza and Sayin, and the voting is after the award goes after the championship game, correct? For the
after the conference championship games.
It doesn't. It goes, but just the week before the playoffs, you start voting.
Where's that SEC bias there?
The Big Ten championship game is December 6th.
They're all that same.
Yeah,
they're all the same week basically. I'll tell you what I'll do, guys. I'll reach out to David Smoke. David has a Heisman vote, and while he absolutely will not tell us who he's going to vote for, he will tell you what where the ballot is, because the what we see with regards to Sean, what you're just talking about, the odds, that's not necessarily what is on the Heisman ballot.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
So
right now,
there'll be some names on there that
you're going to have Marcel Reed, Ty Simpson, Diego Pavia from Vanderbilt. Jeremiah Smith is listed in the odds. He's not winning it ahead of his quarterback. There's Gunnar Stockton, Jeremiah Love. Gunnar
Stockton is in there.
He's down the list, but look, is it plus 3,000? He's not winning it, but it's like saying for the National League MVP odds, Kyle Schwarber was on there. He was the second choice, and he was like plus 2,000 because everybody Ohtani was Matsui. I'm thinking of the Yankees 100 years ago. Ohtani was minus 5,000. So someone has to be second or third or whatever. But it's probably once again it's probably is there any way Ohio State let's play Michigan? Is there any way? Do either of you think that Ohio State and Indiana aren't 1-2 going into the Big Ten championship game, or will either of those teams or 1-3? Maybe they whatever. Texas A&M moves ahead if they beat somebody, but are both of those undefeated teams going into the Big Ten championship?
I think that's far from a guarantee. You can see the weakness in both of the teams. They say Ohio State's just kind of rolled over everybody, which you look at the box scores and they have, but their work is far from over. The toughest test is going to come in Ann Arbor here in a couple of weeks.
Yeah, because they're not losing to UCLA today without the quarterback. They're not they're not losing to Rutgers.
No,
so it's going to be Michigan. Right now, Indiana and Ohio State are both unbeaten in the Big Ten. Oregon 6-1. USC kind of lurking there, 7-2, climbing up the rankings there with another ranked game today, with another chance to win a game and maybe play themselves into this playoff here. But yeah, if these two teams are both unbeaten and they play in the Big Ten championship game, is that game then a showcase and basically a showdown for the Heisman?
No, I think right now your Heisman leader should be Ty Simpson. I don't think there's any bones to be made about that one. The support that both Fernando Mendoza and Julian Sayin have had. Julian Sayin's more of a he's just kind of the guy that's pulling the strings. He's got all the toys around him, and I think you're going to see that reflected in the voters. Ohio State's good. He's been really good as well, but he's been good. They believe, I think the general sense as a voter is that they believe he's been good because of the stuff around him, maybe not because of who he is completely. In terms of Fernando Mendoza, they've had a really balanced running attack and a fantastic defense. Alabama doesn't have all that stuff to go with them. I know they've got the one loss early in the season to Florida State that's pretty ugly, but Ty Simpson also has the best win of all of those candidates when they went on the road and beat Georgia at home. So he's a guy that's really carried their offense. You look last week at LSU, he threw for 277 and pretty much single-handedly carried that offense because they just could not run the football against LSU. And that's been something that has been a bit of a trend for Alabama this year is they don't always get the running game going, but Ty Simpson's good enough to make that offense work.
Now,
I'm going to agree with Matt on this. I don't. Part of the problem is, and something that Sean, you and I know, right? There's a heavy East Coast bias when it comes to the.
This, and then, but I know the odds makers don't like to be wrong about stuff too.
Right.
So, like, that's the thing. I mean, if that's going to be the case, I think you're going to see his numbers start to drop in the odds because, as we get closer, I think people aren't betting the Heisman as much now. They'll start to bet it in probably the next 2 or 3 weeks, and his odds are going to start to drop because I know sportsbooks don't like to pay out, plus 800 bets. So,
well, there's that, but I was about to say that, perception with regard to the voters becomes reality. So if Ohio State and and Indiana would get into the title game, as you had mentioned, it wouldn't surprise me at all that either one of those guys would walk away with the Heisman, because it's not necessarily who deserves it; it's just who gets the most votes. And and there's a lot of lobbying going on behind the scenes, and so you don't know. I mean, but would I be surprised if either of those guys won? No, I wouldn't be. Just that, are they the most deserving? Probably not.
The cool, Alabama and Simpson have a chance. Simpson has a chance here to kind of boost his candidacy and his stats, and obviously Alabama has a chance. Well, both teams really. In this 3:30 window, there's a couple, games where both teams are ranked. Alabama, Oklahoma is probably the showcase one of those. Iowa plays USC. We talked about USC a little bit. USC is just like they're kind of sitting there waiting to strike if some of these other teams ahead of them start to lose and USC beats Iowa. And can, USC's schedule here, which is interesting. They play Iowa, they play Oregon, they play UCLA. Listen, if USC can beat Iowa and can beat Oregon, which, isn't out of the realm of possibility. I don't know that it's going to happen. Oregon's going to be favored. They're 100. And then, obviously they got to beat UCLA. They would probably make a pretty good case to be in the playoff at that point. With those wins over Oregon, obviously you'd probably jump them. But, between those two games, I know, Matt, you're probably looking at the Alabama game. As an SEC guy, Alabama, Oklahoma. UCF plays at Texas Tech. North Carolina State plays at Miami. ACC teams. Georgia Tech plays at Boston College. And then Virginia plays at Duke. There's a bunch of those ACC teams. I'm not real worried about those games, to be honest. Duke is favored against number 19 Virginia. Obviously, Matt, you're probably looking at the Alabama-Oklahoma game, Craig.
So there's a couple scenarios here. Alabama, Oklahoma will probably be the one that I have on my TV, but both that Iowa USC game and that Virginia Duke game, they have conference championship implications in terms of the bigger picture. If Duke wins today, it's now we're sounding an alarm at the ACC league offices, and Jim Phillips is losing his head, because that means that Duke continues to have one loss.
Jump up the table
and use their path for the ACC title. They're still very much in the ACC title race, and they have 4 losses. That's a big issue for the ACC. But in terms of USC has to win out. I talked about this game earlier in the week with Jim and said that this is a special prove it game for Lincoln Riley, because this is everything that represents Lincoln Riley's kryptonite since he's been at USC and really his final years at Oklahoma. Is they talked about the physicality and the lack thereof at USC in terms of, especially on their defensive side of the football, and that's what Iowa brings. They want to run the football and they want to be physical. They want to drag you into the mud and have a wrestling match for 4 quarters. That's not USC style. But if USC wins today, and just say they win out, just throw that out there. If Ohio State goes into Ann Arbor and loses, USC's in the Big Ten championship game, not Ohio State, not Michigan. It would be USC and Indiana in that case. So they have a path to the Big Ten title game. Technically, everything is still ahead of them, but they've got to win out in order to do that. And then you go down to Tuscaloosa, Alabama. You talked about strengthening a Heisman case against that defense. Ty Simpson's going to have his work cut out for him with their inability to run the football. Last week against LSU, they're going to have to get something going on the ground and make Brent Venables respect it, because if they get stuck in 3rd and longs, then R. Mason Thomas and the boys up front are going to just be able to tee off on that offensive line for Alabama. It's a case where, if you're anybody outside of the SEC, you are definitely rooting for Alabama. And not only are you rooting for Alabama today, you're rooting for Georgia as well, because you want to see that group of 2 lost teams that's kind of hanging around on the backside of the SEC, trying to work their way into the backside of that playoff, go ahead and drop out. You don't have to worry about them.
Alabama -6.5. You like Alabama there?
I'm not sure I'd lay the points.
All right. Jim, I was going to say any of these 3:30 games, Central Florida's playing at Texas Tech as a huge underdog. And any of these, one of these games I think that is pretty interesting because I saw them ranked somewhere is App State at James Madison. James Madison, who's 8-1 and leading the Sun Belt East at 6-0. Southern Miss on the other side at 5-0. App State's struggling in the league, but that, I guess that's a pretty big game for them. I mean, they, obviously there's no margin for error there for James Madison. They lost to Louisville in a tight game. I mean, they lost by 14 points. It was pretty close the whole way, but I get that's a big game. Is there any game here, Jim? You're looking at it at the 3:30.
At the 3:30, I think, and Matt touched on it. We talked about it yesterday. Actually, 2, and they're both ACC games. NC State is visiting Miami, and Virginia is at Duke. And as Matt said, when we mentioned this doomsday scenario, Virginia could very well lose that game to Duke. NC State could beat Miami. So, I think looking at it from purely a standpoint of more as to, I believe Oklahoma and Alabama will be the most entertaining of those games. But NC State and Miami and Virginia and Duke, to me, that will go a long way to saying, if Virginia loses that game and Miami loses, which is possible, then chaos reigns supreme in the ACC.
And when you look at some of the later games, my 2 favorite leagues to look at, the Mountain West and the Big 12. There's a couple massive, every week is massive, obviously, in these leagues because, especially with, the Big 12. Let me pull this.
Well, you got TCU and BYU.
You got, it's 7:00. Florida's at Ole Miss at 7. Utah's at Baylor as an 8.5-point favorite. They're 13th right now. UCLA's at Ohio State. No quarterback for UCLA. Texas at Georgia. Massive, massive game for both teams. Texas obviously can't lose. Matt goes to, that goes back to those teams you're trying to, no one wants to see Texas win this game. And then all of a sudden you got Texas and Georgia in the mix. And then, TCU at BYU. BYU still sitting there at 12th after their loss last week, but still with 1 loss. So you got a lot of these games late in the evening that are going to continue to kind of shape how all these teams, Utah, Texas, BYU, they can't afford to really lose another game here. Texas definitely can't. Utah definitely can't. Or BYU probably can at this point with one loss. But still hanging around. And there's so many weeks of games left. We had 3 weeks of games, and then we have the championship. So these teams, there's going to be all kinds of losses. You've seen how it's kind of gone over the last couple weeks or the month. I mean, where these games every week teams lose, and because down the list, everybody is kind of the same. When you see some of these late games, Matt, which one? Obviously Texas, Georgia is probably your backyard. I don't know if you're going to that or not, but that's the big game tonight. I guess you want to probably speak about that, and then maybe if there's another game you're looking at.
Yeah. I would be going. I have a prior engagement that I have to tend to this evening. That took importance over the game. But no, in terms of this game, I'll talk about the football, and then I'll talk a little bit more of the outside, kind of the general feeling that I've had really since last year about Texas and Georgia, and just kind of the dynamic of it. First off is that Texas comes in with the second-ranked run defense in the country. Georgia has to be able to run the football. That's what their offense is predicated around. They love screen passes and running. Like the goal of the Georgia offense is to get the ball to your playmakers and let the playmakers go make plays. Similar case with Texas. Texas gathered 60 total rushing yards across 2 meetings last year against Georgia in terms of rushing. They start in wide zone. They have a game plan they have an offense that can be game planned for. Kirby Smart proved that last year. So they have to be able to run the football. If Texas is not able to run the football, I'm not sure this is going to be that much of a game unless their defense is that good. Because if Texas is not able to run the football, then you're talking about getting Arch Manning in some really uncomfortable situations. And you're talking about getting a form of Arch Manning that you got at the start of the year, not the guy that's thrown for 300 yards in back-to-back games. Texas is coming off a bye. They have the rest. Georgia came home. They pounded Mississippi State. It's a different kind of vibe and team. Sark thrives as an underdog. He has thrived as an underdog since he's been at Texas. You can look back to those games against Alabama, really when I'd say Sark kind of announced his presence as a potential power in college football. They were underdogs. The games last year, Texas was the favorite, but every time. Now they're laying almost a touchdown going on the road. It's a spot that they've done well in. Outside of that, I can tell you that Texas, just in a general sense, left a real nasty taste in the mouth of Georgia fans last year. There was an arrogance and a sense of entitlement that those fans brought. No one enjoyed watching those bottles get thrown on the field and the show that was last year. But what I'll tell you is that no matter who Texas thought they were last year, Georgia went out there and they physically beat them. And I'll tell you what, if Texas is going to win in Athens tonight, they're going to have to physically beat Georgia. There's no one sitting on the bench. There's no call that's going to get overturned because bottles were thrown on the football field. Man to man, line up across them and beat them for 60 minutes. That's what Texas is going to have to do. I don't think they're going to be up for the task, though.
Let me ask you a question real quick. If Alabama and Georgia win, does this 90% chance that the SEC gets only 4 teams?
Yeah, pretty close. So you'll have the group of A&M, Alabama, Georgia, and Ole Miss, right?
But and then maybe Vanderbilt, if they went out.
That's where Vanderbilt's going to be hanging out there on the backside. If I remember correctly, they have to go to Knoxville for their last game of the season, which won't be an easy task. But I'll give Diego Pavia credit. I kind of I was crapping on him a little bit earlier in the season when he was talking about the Heisman. Really, when they had kind of in the 0 to 1 loss range, they were hanging around there. And I was saying that he didn't deserve it, and in fairness, he didn't deserve it. He hadn't eclipsed 200 passing yards in a conference game, but now he's hit 300 passing yards in back-to-back games, and that's against Texas and that's against Auburn. And that Auburn defense is really good. Up until last week, they were one of 3 teams in college football that hadn't given up more than 24 points. So he's found a little bit of a groove in terms of their passing offense this year, and they're going to have a very legitimate shot. They need help. They need some help. Don't get me wrong. Vanderbilt will need some help, but if they win out, they have a very legitimate chance to sneak their way into the backside of that playoff.
Hey Jim, is there one of these games late in the window that you're looking at? After 7:00, Florida Ole Miss, or BYU, BYU TCU. I mean, BYU is only a 3.5-point favorite against TCU at home. I mean, that would probably be my pick. But what are you looking at?
Yeah, I like these. I love BYU at home. It's they're very. It's a very tough place to play, and they played very well there. Mine was San Diego State and Boise, on the mountainside. I think Boise still has aspirations of keeping that G6 title as the one of the best team in G6.
They're there. These are the only 2 teams left in the league that are 4-1. I mean, these are the 2 teams sitting at the top of the standings. So, I mean, it's a massive, massive game tonight. 10:30 at night on CBS Sports.
Yeah, they're sold out at Snapdragon Stadium down there in San Diego. And I don't think, frankly, that Boise is good this year. Obviously, Ashton Gently being gone does take a lot out of your offense. And I think San Diego State. I think these 2 teams are very even.
Both teams got blown out last week on the road. Boise State got blown out by Fresno State. San Diego State went out to Hawaii and got trounced. I mean, both teams. That was their first loss in the league, and now they got to turn around, and someone's going to take hold of this, the spot here, right?
Right, and there is possibilities that the American, because there's so many games left with 1 lost teams. I think what they want to be, and I'm talking now about Boise, is Boise wants to be in the position to make an argument over James Madison that they would deserve that Power 6, I'm sorry, Group of 6 playoff berth. It wouldn't be an easy argument, I would think, but that is the theory of the case, and I think it'll be fun to watch. I think these 2 teams have got it's an elimination game, and I think they realize that.
Yeah, I think for James, you talk about James Madison a little bit here. James Madison has App State. They play Washington State at Coastal Carolina, who that's another tough game. Coastal's 5-1, so that'll be for the division at that point if Coastal keeps winning, and then maybe a game. It's probably going to be Southern Miss at that point because everyone else in the other division has 2 losses. If James Madison wins out, I would think at that point they're 11-1. Or no, 12-1. They're probably going to be hot, pretty highly ranked up that table with everyone else. I mean, it's hard to talk about this now because there's so many of these teams are going to lose and do stuff. But if you have an extra chance in that playoff game, the league playoff to go out, when these other teams are sitting at home with 2 losses or something like this, or whatever it is, and you have a chance to go out and make a statement on TV in front of everybody. Listen, we deserve to be this team. It's not just for them, but any of these other teams that are looking to get into, a playoff spot, sometimes, when you look at the SEC and you're like, well, should this team be in? Well, look, I mean, they just played Alabama really tight. Like, they should be in over some team who's ranked 14th or 15th from the ACC, whatever it is. I just think you got a big chance to kind of, make a statement there. So that is a pretty big game.
Yeah. The other thing too, and you bring this up, when we're talking about playoffs, The CFP, I can tell you right now, does not want to see Notre Dame lose this afternoon. They want Notre Dame in there. Notre Dame is a ratings monster. And if there's no way in hell that a 3-loss Notre Dame team is getting in the playoffs.
No, they have nothing on their schedule to back up being a playoff team. In terms of those group of 6 schools, I think everybody's probably, not that they wouldn't be anyways, but you're still extremely focused on what's ahead of you and winning your conference title. Yes. Because for all 3 of those conferences that you mentioned, the American, the Mountain West, and the Sun Belt with James Madison, if you win that conference, you have a legitimate shot. Because when we talked about it earlier, and Duke being favored with Virginia coming to them, if Duke does make it to that ACC title game and Duke does win that ACC title game, it's doomsday, but it's a very real scenario where you're talking about potentially 2 group of 6 teams over the ACC champion.
And it could happen. I mean, it's not like it wouldn't be I wouldn't be stunned if it did.
Mm-hmm. So and I mean, at least in James Madison's case, because I think at least in terms of record and what they've done so far this season, they're a little bit better suited than whoever would come out of the Mountain West. But if those teams in the American continue to beat up on each other and just kind of keep that cycle going, and those top teams continue to build up some losses, then again, you're in a scenario where if James Madison is sitting there with their 1 loss being a 14-point road loss earlier in the season, to who has been a very good Louisville team up until the past 2 weeks, then they have they have a much stronger argument than a Mountain West, and they'd probably have a stronger argument than, say, a 3-loss champion from the American.
Yeah, if they're 12-1, I mean, I think there's not much of an argument there. I mean, especially in that other scenario where you're saying, these other teams have 3 losses, and I just think, they're probably gonna get in at that point. Mm-hmm. What of these, Matt? What any game, anytime, whatever, is there you have any kind of games you're looking at for maybe putting a wager on or something like this? Is there any game that sticks out that maybe we haven't talked about?
A wager on, I don't have any that just stick out.
You're not looking at Eastern Michigan, Ball State, or
I can't say that I am, honestly.
Oregon State, Tulsa.
Yeah. But what I'll tell you is,
I'm sorry, I was just going to say Oregon State, Tulsa. That was my bet.
Oh yeah,
there you go.
No, I'll just give you a general theme that I'm watching today, at least in the SEC. It was one as I was going through and I was writing my watch guide this week that I noticed is there's a theme throughout the SEC this week, and it's revenge. You think about that Alabama-Oklahoma game. Oklahoma was the team that knocked Alabama out of the college football playoff last year. You got revenge. Florida and Ole Miss. You take out all the Lane Kiffin stuff that they're already, hooping and hollering about at each other on X. And you remember back to last year that Florida's the team that knocked Ole Miss out of the college football playoff. South Carolina's going on the road to A&M. Last year, A&M, 1-loss team, went into South Carolina. South Carolina beat them, and when they beat them, they knocked out the running back Le'Veon Moss, which effectively ended Texas A&M's season. And then you talk about Texas and Georgia. Texas, a team that lost twice last year to Georgia, they've got revenge on their mind. You look up and down that conference, and it's all spots where you can look at them and go, hey, they stopped us from doing what we wanted to do last year. Like, they were the final roadblock that ended our goals last year. How do you respond to that? And, do you treat it like that, or do you treat it as just another game and go out there and handle your business, which is what some of these top teams are going to have to do, because it's another game. And when you play that revenge factor, that revenge wears off. It's the same as adrenaline. It lasts for a drive or two, and then it's gone. So it's a theme of revenge today in the SEC.
Keep an eye out, guys, in that Florida game against Ole Miss as to DJ Langoy. And he was taken out last week by the interim coach, Billy Gonzalez. And I'll be interested in seeing, Matt and I talked about this in earlier in the week, but Sean, what we were talking about was Langaway at this point in time is like a golfer's got yips. Okay, he doesn't know he's throwing off his back. He isn't throwing off his back foot. He's making he's short arming passes. He's just freaked out. Since Billy Napier left, as to what exactly he's got to do. And Florida has a great defense. That's not a problem. But can they score points? And I think that's what are we going to get out of DJ Langaway this week? I think it's going to be very interesting. He took first team snaps all week, but will he finish the game because he had he didn't have a great outing last week.
I have a game that I was looking at on X or Twitter, whatever you want to call it. I don't know if a lot of people are talking about it. I know we haven't talked about it on this show yet. It's an 8 p.m. kickoff. Matchup predictor has it basically dead even, and it's a battle of the only two undefeated teams in a specific league for first place. Do you know which game I'm talking about?
I'm going to go with no.
Kennesaw State Eagles against the Jacksonville State Gamecocks. Kennesaw State right now is 5-0 in Conference USA, 7-2 overall. Jacksonville State is 5-0 in Conference USA, 6-3 overall. Both teams, Kennesaw State's, won 5. Let me see, 5 in a row or 6 in a row. Let me go back here. They've won 7 in a row. They lost to Wake Forest 10-9 on opening weekend. Then they got smoked by Indiana, but they played Indiana. So, that was pretty cool. But they're basically, 2 points away from being 8-1 here and maybe in the discussion to be ranked. And Jacksonville State, same. I mean, they've come in winning 4 in a row. They lost to Southern Miss. Really, really big game. The line is really tight. It started at 1.5. Now it's 2.5 to Kennesaw State on the road. Both teams playing pretty well. They played last week. Jacksonville State went on the road 2 weeks. They've been on the road for the last 5 weeks. They went on the road and they beat Sam Houston 29-27. They beat Delaware. They beat Middle Tennessee State on the road by 3 points. They beat UTEP on the road by 3 points. They're used to playing, Sam Houston, Middle Tennessee State. They're not the, they're not, they're at the bottom of the league. But listen, they found a way to win the game on the road, which is always difficult to do. Kennesaw State's been on the road 2 of the last 3. Beat FIU, beat New Mexico State in another tough game. Both these teams have played and been battle tested. Odom and Creel. Creel's not big numbers at quarterback. However, Cook, the running back's got 1,100, almost 1,200 yards rushing and 12 touchdowns. It's a game. It's on ESPNU. It's probably not going to have a lot of eyes on it, but it's an interesting game. And, both these teams now have a chance to go to the top. Western Kentucky sitting there at 5-1 as well. So that's probably a game off the board you look at. And when you look at the matchup prediction, it basically split down the middle. I mean, that's a pretty good game to watch. I know both teams are pretty pumped up. I'm looking at social media, and they're really excited for this game. I know it's going to be a pretty packed house at Jacksonville State, Jim.
Yeah, it's I'll admit it wasn't on my radar. But that being said, it's hard to explain to people when you talk about Kennesaw State, Jacksonville, that whole routine is that to these two universities and to those conferences, those games are as big as, Texas and Georgia. So they're going to be out in full. Those teams are going to play well. And
someone's betting
it. I'm sorry?
Someone is betting this game, too, because the over started at 51.5, and it's up to 55.5. So there's someone is bet. The game is definitely moving. People are throwing some money on the over, apparently. But, yeah, right. It's a big game for both teams.
Right. And people forget, too, that these universities, specifically these two in the conference, have put a number of players in the NFL. So it's not like these are, we look at Texas and Georgia as a marquee game, absolutely as it should be. But as you're saying, this is it's for first place, and for a subset of college football fans, this is a very important game as well.
I can we can file this one under Matthew's fun facts that no one cares about. But both of my parents graduated from Kennesaw State. I myself spent a brief stint of time at Kennesaw State.
How about that?
It's about 20 minutes from my hometown where I live. So I was home last week and had a family gathering, and I'm just sitting there, and my grandma was like, "Oh, look, Kennesaw State's winning!" Like it's a very celebrated. Like they enjoy seeing them do well. I also think it's interesting the changes that Kennesaw State's overgone since they made the jump to Division One football.
Yep.
They weren't fantastic really when they were hanging around in Division Two, but since they made the jump to Division One, they've consistently gotten better year over year. So take some financial backing, but once you get up there, if you invest the right way, then you can create a winner at a lot of places. And Kennesaw State's done that, and they've done a really good job with their culture. And I can tell you, in North Georgia, a little bit north of Atlanta, they care a lot about their Owls.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't started talking yet about college basketball. The season just started, and I know we'll kind of talk about that a little more. But I always, especially on the Saturday games, it's always interesting to find those teams, and everybody's always looking at in March, for these games. Oh man, who's going to be the sleeper team? Who's going to do this? And you find those teams in these leagues, because now with the way that NIL money is and scholarships are, players aren't always going to wherever. You're not going to all the talent's not concentrated at Alabama now or LSU. I mean, now the way it is, you can get some talent going to these other schools. I always think that's pretty good for the game. The flip side is, everybody moving around, but that's another story for another day. But yeah, I think it's a big game today, and just kind of wanted to give a little shout out to both those teams that are playing well. Other than that, I mean, what you got an upset special today? I mean, is there any team that should specifically be on upset watch, and then is there a team that you think gets upset?
I scrolled when I looked at the SEC this week, I went chalk. I just kind of chalked it up. I had all the favorites. I picked all.
Does Notre Dame have any chance to lose?
Notre Dame has a chance to lose. I mean, listen, Pat Narduzzi said it, so it does make me nervous when he says we could lose by 100 this week. As long as we win the next two, I don't care. But there is a very real possibility that right now Notre Dame is playing the best team in the ACC today at lunchtime. So they have a very legitimate shot.
On the road.
Yeah, a couple weeks ago they looked like they did not look good at Boston College when they paid a trip there. And Boston College is a 1-9 football team. Like they're probably going to get blown out of the water today by Georgia Tech. And there was a time with 3 minutes left in the third quarter that it was a 12-10 football game and Notre Dame was leading. So like Notre Dame is not invincible by any measure, but they have gotten better on defense, and their running game has come along to supplement CJ Carr in that offense.
Could score some points too.
Yeah, Notre Dame feels like they're probably as cohesive a team as they have been all season, which is what you're hoping for. But at the same point, Pitt's got a quarterback that since they plugged him in, they're 5-0. Like they plugged him in, their offenses went, and they haven't looked back since they made the move off of Eli Holstein. So
I'm not even gonna count. ACC games don't even count as upsets anymore because those teams all stink. TCU at BYU. I don't even, BYU is there. I mean, the line is 3.5 at BYU. TCU is a pretty decent football team. They lost last week to Iowa State, but BYU off the loss. I mean, does that game scare you a little bit if you're a BYU fan?
I would normally say yes, and I think it's a solid game for the slate, but they're going back home. They got embarrassed on the road at Texas Tech. They're a team that thrives off of their ability to meet to create turnovers and create havoc. They didn't do that last week. They didn't have any turnovers. I think that's going to be a different case this week at home because Jim touched on it earlier. BYU is a really hard place to play. Like both those schools out in Utah, they don't get talked about a lot. Really, really difficult places to play. And as far as TCU is concerned, they have not played consistent football at all. They started off the season really hot. They've faltered throughout the year. I cited Sonny Dykes and his championship pedigree as a reason that I believed in TCU earlier in the year, and it just has not shown up. So there is that, and I'll throw one more out there. This one's a double-digit one that I'm a little bit interested in. Michigan goes to Chicago to play Northwestern at Wrigley Field. Northwestern's a team that's given a bunch of schools issues in the Big Ten this year, and Michigan is
early game.
Yeah, and Michigan is far from being this like superior opponent that is just definitely going to go out there and just beat a team that they should beat by any measure. So that's very much a spot where they could run into some trouble this afternoon.
Jim, do you see anything, any kind of upsets anywhere? Maybe.
I think Miami loses.
Yeah, that doesn't count. It's ACC.
I'm sorry, I apologize.
They could. I mean, look, what the ACC really needs Georgia Tech to just like blow everybody out the next 4 weeks and just go into it with, go be 12-1 and like just take all the doubt away. I think at this point, I mean, I think you're allowed to have one bad game, and it is what it is. You lost by 12 points to NC State on the road, but they really, really, really need Georgia Tech to just win out, and then I think you make the case. The Duke thing if Duke go, it's a disaster for the league. They really, really need Georgia Tech. But these other teams, I have zero. I would never bet on any of these teams. I have zero confidence that any of these teams could do anything. I have no idea, what any of them are going to do from week to week. The only teams for me, I just have, Texas A&M. I think, they're really good. I think Ohio State had a little bit of a wobble. I think they kind of turned that around. They're going to blow out UCLA today. But I have zero confidence in any ACC team to ever do anything. And that being said about the Georgia Tech thing, they're probably going to go lose to Georgia and be with 2 losses, and then they're going to go into the championship game, and who knows what happens. And I just think that whole league is a disaster.
Yeah,
well, they play Pitt next week.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just, I just, they're not going to win out. Like, that's the thing. I mean, they could have 3 losses by the time, it's just a mess. Like, if you have a 3-loss champion, like, it's just a disaster for the league. And this is where it's heading, I think, because they're going to, I don't think they beat Georgia. And, if they lose to Pitt or whatever, I mean, in Pittsburgh loses today, and you look at the standings right now, and Pitt's going to have 3 losses at minimum. Duke already has 4 losses. Miami has 2. Virginia has 2. They stink. Pittsburgh, Georgia Tech's going to play Georgia, and they could have 3 losses. Like, none of these teams unless Georgia Tech wins out, then I think you have zero argument. If Georgia Tech wins out, you just say, listen, they beat Georgia. They deserve to be in the playoff 100%. Any other scenario, and I think it's, if Pittsburgh beats Notre Dame and wins out too, I think you can make the argument for them too. But, like, if they don't win out and all these teams are losing, it's a disaster. And we've talked about this today, and we'll continue to talk about it. It's a mess for the league and going forward for the league, because now all of a sudden these teams are going to start saying, well, why am I staying in the league? Why am I, already conferences are already trying to pick the league apart. So,
go ahead, Matt.
I was just going to say, this is the easiest thing, or I think the thing that the ACC is definitely hoping for is that Georgia Tech wins today, Georgia Tech wins next week. They don't care what happens in Atlanta with Georgia. I've started doing some research, at least statistically, on that game in Atlanta here in a couple weeks. And Sean, I'm with you. I'm not loving the Yellow Jackets' chances just based off their 98th ranked run defense. But it's either got to be Georgia Tech or Pitt for them. I don't feel like there's. I guess if they can figure out a way to get Miami into that championship and have Miami win, then that's another option.
If Pittsburgh beats Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, and Miami the next 3 weeks, there's no debate. Although if they go to the championship game and lose, I guess there is. But if they beat Notre Dame, Georgia Tech, Miami 3 weeks in a row against ranked teams, I think you have Pittsburgh is clearly the team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, here's what they can't have happen. They can't have these teams take multiple losses.
Like Pittsburgh can't beat Notre Dame and then lose to Georgia Tech and then Georgia or beat Georgia Tech and then lose to Miami and then all these teams have 3 losses and then you go into then everybody's there's a scenario here. If Pittsburgh loses or beats Notre Dame, beats Georgia Tech, loses to Miami, all of a sudden, all these teams have 3. I guess Miami would still have 2 losses unless they lose to somebody else. Notre Dame would be out. Georgia Tech would be out. Pittsburgh would be out. Miami would still kind of be in it if they won, but then I would think they'd go to the ACC championship game and probably lose to Duke or somebody or SMU, and all these that. There's a nightmare scenario, and I'll be honest, watching this league all year. I would say there's probably a 50-50 chance that what I just said happens, and it's just chaos.
Yeah.
Well, if you go back to last night, we started the show talking about Louisville and Clemson.
These teams have had their own destiny in their hands and constantly have fallen flat.
Have you guys ever seen a final fourth quarter as crazy as that game last night? I mean, it was no, you win it. No, you take it. No, I don't want it. You take it. I mean, it was a comedy of errors. I mean, the punter for Clemson, gets a snap that he can't handle, and that puts Louisville right on the 31-yard line with 2 minutes left to go, and then they have back-to-back penalties that set them out of field goal range. Mm-hmm. It's all they had to do was kick a field goal and win. They can't do that.
This, watching these, last week's NFL, the people are killing the Thursday and Monday night games. They were both 10-7. They're both 10-7, and then last night, the games aren't they're very interesting. I mean, they're not very good, maybe good. Defensively they've been good, or they've been, and they've been entertaining. They haven't been maybe well played, but these games have been pretty good. The Thursday night game for the NFL hasn't been good, but the NCAA games, I think, on the Wednesday night games, Kent State and Akron went to overtime. That was a pretty good game. The Ohio Western Michigan game was an entertaining game. The Wednesday night games were terrible. The Thursday night game was terrible. And then last night, Oregon beat Minnesota, blew out Minnesota and Clemson. But they've been, if you like watching games, they've been all right. And obviously, we're in the middle of games every day for another month or another. I don't even know, 3 more weeks. I think we have games every day.
Well, they had that sign. I mean, that's when ESPN signed to deal with the Mid-America Conference. The deal with ESPN was that MACtion would happen, that they would play any Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Then they did the ACC made the deal with ESPN that they would play games on Friday night.
You know what? There's no games on Wednesday. There's no games on Wednesday. The Wednesday before Thanksgiving. I just looked at that, so that'll
right. So that has to do with the
basketball.
Universities, basically. Yeah, basketball one. The other is that universities. That's the opportunity for people to go home for the holidays, and there are teams that will play on the day after Thanksgiving,
Yes.
and that whole weekend afterwards. So Wednesday night prior to Thanksgiving, they normally don't play college basketball.
It's a big college night. I mean, there's a lot of championship games and stuff like that. It's always been a big college game. Yeah, all right. So we got games kicking off in about an hour here, so we'll wrap this up. And any last words there, Matthew or Jim?
I just think it's going to be fun to.
Was that a Michigan sign?
Horns down.
Oh, horns down, horns down. I thought maybe that was a Metallica sign or something.
Yeah, I thought that way. Yeah. No, I'm just gonna say it should be a very entertaining day of college football if you're a football
There's
fan.
going to be some upsets. We all know this, but once again, any ACC ranked team losing is not an upset. So don't even come with us with that. But we'll be back.
It's just your basic, typical Saturday in the
Saturday.
It's just every day in the ACC. All right, we'll be back next week. Probably the same time. We'll get this locked in now ahead of the playoffs and all this stuff. So thanks for watching. We will see you later.